Good evening and welcome to the Nassau County Overdose Awareness Seminar. My name is Kara Ballar and my husband is the pastor here at the Journey. And we are just so honored to host this event and partner with TJ and his entire team to bring this informational seminar to you and to our community. And just grateful for all of the partners who are here serving and caring for people right here in Nassau County and beyond. So at this time, I want to introduce and welcome to the stage Mayor Bradley Bean of the City of Fernandina Beach.
Hey, thank you, everybody, and thank you, Ms. Kara. This is truly a community effort, and I am so proud that everyone has come together for this and such a great turnout. There are people from all over our community. I see the FBPD is here. We have our sheriff's office, our fire department. Other elected officials like Dr. Kathy Burns is here with us tonight because this is so important. You see all the time on the national news things about these overdoses happening, and you just don't think it's going to happen to you. You don't think this is in your backyard until it does happen to someone close to you. This is growing up here. It happened to people that I knew in my school, and it still happens here in Nassau County today. So what I want to do is just say thank you to everyone who came out here tonight to help. The first step to taking care of this here in Nassau County, here in Fernandina Beach, is talking about it, seeing what we can do, and that's what we're doing here tonight. So thank you to our panelists. Thank you to the Journey Church, to Miss Michelle Hallbrook, to the Project Opioid team, because this is just a big community partnership. So I want to bring up the head of Project Opioid Jacksonville, and he'll tell you about himself, but please put your hands together for Mr. TJ Ward.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you all for being here. Like a little bit of housekeeping before we get going, how many of you are already on the Wi-Fi network? You found the password and you're good to go. So most of you are not. Okay, we're going to throw a slide up there for you to be able to get on the Wi-Fi, and that way here in a minute when we ask you to take a little screenshot or to take a picture of the QR code that you're going to see on the screen, you can do that, and we'll get started here in just a second after y'all can log into this Wi-Fi. As Mayor Bean said, my name is TJ Ward. I am the North Florida Director of Advocacy for Project Opioid. We are an initiative that is funded by the Florida Blue Foundation, and we're facilitated through the Jacksonville Chamber of Commerce. We work with key leaders across North Florida to address and confront the overdose crisis in our region. And I want to say what a privilege it is to work with the partnerships that have been formed here in Nassau County. You have amazing treatment providers and resource providers in this community that are working hard every day to help battle this epidemic. So we're grateful and honored to partner with every single one of them. And I want to say a special thanks to Journey Church and the team that has worked so hard to make this a special event. You've really rolled out the red carpet. Thank you to Pastor and his wife and Hunter and Brandon and their team for making this event possible. Can we give them a hand? I also want to say thanks to Community Coalition Alliance, specifically Danielle Holland and Libby Thompson. I would love for them to stand up real quick. They are looking at me like they don't want to, but these two have been so helpful in putting this event together. And they lead the Prevention Coalition for this county, so you're going to want to get to know them if you don't already. I also want to say thanks to those who are supplying resources in the lobby, many great providers here today partnering with us. LSF Health Systems has helped sponsor this event, so we're grateful for them. And then want to just make sure that I introduce you to our program manager at Project Opioid. She's standing in the back, and her name is Abby Bell. Abby, can you please raise your hand so that people know who you are? And of course, we appreciate you being here this evening, carving some time out of your schedule to come and hear about what we're going to share with you this evening. I want to say a special welcome to those who are watching online. We are live streaming and recording this event, and so we want to say thanks to those who are tuning in. Why are we here tonight? That's really the question we need to answer. Like all communities across the country, Nassau County is dealing with the rapid growth and impact of opioids, fentanyl, and counterfeit drugs. In 2020, 2021, and 2022, overdose deaths began to skyrocket in a way that we never could have imagined. And 2023 has been trending in much the same manner. Synthetic opioids like fentanyl, as well as polydrug mixtures and fake pills disguised as prescription medications, are driving the current overdose crisis. So our goal for this evening is to bring awareness to the dangers related to illicit substances, including fentanyl, and to provide community members such as yourselves, parents, youth, with information and action steps that all of us together can do to be a part of the solution. Communities must come together to work together to implement solutions that save lives. That's the only way we're going to make a difference when it comes to this issue. So tonight you're going to hear from subject matter experts. They're going to share data, statistics, percentages of increase related to overdoses and overdose deaths. But as you look at those statistics, as you hear those numbers, as you hear those percentages of increase, just understand that every data point represents a human life that has been destroyed by this epidemic. I think sometimes we can get lost in the numbers and just think, oh, that's not a factor here in Nassau County. Mayor Bean mentioned, this is right here in our backyard. It's impacting every single one of us. And so it's important for us to understand that this is an issue that does not discriminate. And with that in mind, I want to start by sharing some data that our partners at North Florida HIDA have provided for us this evening. North Florida HIDA is led by Director Bob Perriam, Scott Delano, and Deborah Babin. HIDA stands for High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area, and HIDA is implementing what is known as the Overdose Response Strategy, which is a public health and public safety partnership that is funded by the Office of National Drug Control Policy and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. So the first slide you're going to see is a map that shows total suspected overdoses from 2020, which are represented by the different dots on the map. In total, there were 267 of these across Nassau County in 2020. What I would like for you to do is look at the map on the screen, find where you live. If you can see the map, kind of find the area in which you live, or maybe where you work, the areas where you frequent in the county, and notice how many overdoses occurred. The next slide highlights total suspected overdoses for 2021, which, as you can see, increased significantly from 267 to 346. Just take a look for a minute at the map and notice those areas that you would frequent. On the next slide, you're going to see that total suspected overdoses for 2022 continue to climb in Nassau County up to 385. And the final comparison slide represents data from January 1st of 2023 through the end of February. In just the first 2 months of this year, there were 63 total suspected overdoses. And that's why we're here. People we know, people we care about, people we love are losing this battle. If I asked you to raise your hand if you know somebody that's been impacted by this, most everybody would raise their hand. Some of you have lost people close to you to this issue, to this disease. And so we're going to talk about that tonight. I want to share with you what you can expect for the rest of the evening. We're going to watch a video interview with a family from right here in Nassau County who lost their daughter and sister to a fentanyl overdose. There's going to be a panel discussion with subject matter experts who are going to describe how this issue is impacting your community. And then you're going to see a brief presentation that outlines 2 things that you can do, every single one of you, all of us, can do to make an immediate impact when it comes to this issue. Then we're going to wrap up the evening talking with a mom from here in Nassau County who is leveraging her loss to make a huge impact. So let's get started by watching a video of Emily Bale's story.
Emily, she was a beautiful soul. She really was. She was kind, generous, she was really funny, and didn't when she wasn't even trying to be funny, and she was a great athlete as well. She loved volleyball, and I remember we went to an event at the University of Florida when she was 15, and two coaches approached me, college coaches approached me, asking how old she was and commenting on her strength and her playing abilities.
She was real innocent, just sweet, and just
Could make
easy.
a friend anywhere.
Right,
Yeah, I used to
right.
get mad because I could never have a friend. If I had a friend, because we were so close in age that it was she had to come with me, and a lot of times they ended up liking her more than me because she really was just the easiest person to get along with. Yeah.
Emily suffered a traumatic experience in her early years in high school. Can you share how that impacted her emotionally?
She was 15, and so when you feel that used and abused, you're too young to navigate those emotions, and I think she sought make herself feel better the only way she knew how, type thing, to
Gotcha.
escape some of those emotions that she was wrestling,
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would take her to counseling. She admittedly would say that she would just sit there through the counseling sessions because she didn't want to talk about it. It was too hard for her, and that is where she just got stuck.
Right.
Yeah, she could
That's
never
tough.
move past it.
She couldn't,
She
So-
was just vulnerable from that point on, and she just really looked towards the wrong things to fulfill her, and she just didn't know how to get out of that cycle. And if she did, it just never stuck. Yeah. But she tried,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not that she didn't try or she didn't want to,
So I wonder if you could maybe describe when you started to realize she was using drugs to cope with that experience, and what were some of the signs that helped you determine that this is in fact what she was struggling with?
She would be agitated. It was like her little brain was just rewired. Mood swings, her friends, her friend base just changed. She didn't know where she belonged.
She did spend, I remember before we were always together, and I think that's one of the biggest things is that she didn't really want to hang out like she used to, we really didn't have much in common, anymore.
I think you made a good point when you said that it was like her brain was rewired, because those who suffer from opioid use disorder, that's exactly what's happening to them, physically. The drug actually rewires their brain to the point that they become somebody that is virtually unrecognizable to those who are close to them. And, I think that leads into the next question, because substance use disorder carries with it a stigma oftentimes where people look at that person as, they're making poor choices. This is a moral failure rather than a disease of, the brain, and talking about the brain being rewired. And I just wonder what that stigma was like for your family when people, would look at Emily a certain way, or maybe even look at your family a certain way. What was that like for her?
I think she was embarrassed. I remember in some of her fits, I remember she would scream that, "Oh, I'm such an embarrassment. What are you ashamed?" And so I think she really wrestled with that. She was just angry with the world. I think she was angry at herself, but she didn't, she didn't know how to move past that.
I think that's what the pattern, she didn't feel worthy enough to be around good people, and
Okay.
so that's what kept her in that pattern of unhealthy relationships, because she had good people that really did try to invest in
Yes.
her and be there for her. But I really think she just felt like she was just not worth their time. And that there was just like no point of return of the things that she had done.
Society as a whole, we don't think about like where this originated, you know? I think that's why I want to be here, is to say, you know, I think we've got to show these people a little more compassion, you know? I think this is their best way of coping with life, with trauma, with things that have happened to them. I don't think that anyone wakes up and says, I want to go start shooting up heroin, you know, like they don't do that. But it happens to people because life sucks sometimes, you know, and there are people that are looking at you and judging you, and you feel that, you know.
And even if you don't have that trauma to start the drug use, it starts as like just something to do, take the edge off, but just doing it, like you said, the rewiring of the brain, your body just gets like, you know, dependent on it. So no matter what the case, just to know that it really is a disease. I mean, people will argue that day and night. It's not a disease, it's a choice, you know. Seeing stuff like that after losing, you know, your little sister do it, it just makes me mad, because it's people are so quick to judge an addict, you know. I mean, she had overdosed like multiple times before she passed away.
Right.
Multiple times, and she didn't want to die. Like, she knew that she eventually would, but she didn't want to, because when we went to see her when she had overdosed, we had went to see her in the hospital, and she said that. She said when they had brought her in with her leg, she was like, I was so scared I was going to die, and I was so scared I was going to go to hell.
Can you just speak to, you know, your experience with the fact that this could happen to anyone, even people that are coming from a good family, that grew up in church, that had all the support that they could, you know, would need, but still, you know, this is impacting them and impacting their families.
Yeah, either they're living under a rock, or I think they're turning a blind eye.
Yeah.
They don't want to acknowledge it. Yeah. It's a real problem. I don't know anyone who's not been touched by it, or know someone, you know, who's suffered. Yeah, it's everywhere, and it doesn't discriminate, you know, and it fully alters the victim, you know. When she died, it was like the weirdest emotion, you know, just like processing it. And I think it's because I felt like we had lost her so long before, you know. Like the person who was here, it wasn't her true self, you know. It was like we grieved the loss of her long before she was gone. And yeah.
Any thoughts for, you know, parents that think, oh, my kid would never do that?
Well, initially you do want to think that,
Right.
because it's a hard reality to face. But it's there. Yeah, anyone can do it.
And I think for a long time, at least I was like in a state of denial, you know. I suspected for a long time, but I was like, there's no way, like my little sister is actually doing these hardcore drugs. And so it was like this wishful thinking, like, no, this isn't an issue, until it was out of control and in your face, and you don't recognize the person sitting across from you, and they want nothing to do with you, you know. It hurts because you know how much more life they could have, you know, and everything that they're missing and, you know, will continue to miss. So, yeah, I think saying something's not there doesn't make it not there.
Right, right. And I think Emily would want us to say, because we want to honor Emily through all of this. And I think she would want us to say, when you have trauma, go and seek help, talk about it, don't isolate, keep hope. And she would say, I feel certain that nothing is worth the pain that it causes. And you know, Leah, when you were saying that Emily didn't want to go to hell, Emily knew Christ, you know, but that is another example of just like, because she condemned herself because of the drug use. So then she felt like God would never forgive her for that. And that is not true.
That's real life. That's real stuff, you know? I want to say thanks to the Bales family for sharing your story. That took a lot of courage, and we all appreciate you and support you. Unfortunately, addiction became too much for Emily to overcome, and as we heard, she died of a fentanyl overdose. She's not alone in this. Tens of thousands of people in communities all across the country are dying from drug overdoses, which leads us to our panel discussion of what it looks like here in Nassau County. So we have with us this evening on the stage Dr. Scott Miles, Coastal Community Behavioral Health, Under Sheriff John Hooper, Nassau County Sheriff's Office, Assistant Chief Greg Rowland, Nassau County Fire Rescue, and Superintendent Dr. Kathy Burns, Nassau County Public Schools. And so we're going to begin the panel discussion by having each member briefly share their title and the role they have within their organization. We're going to start with you, Dr. Burns, and just move down the table.
Good evening. Good evening. Kathy Burns, Superintendent of Schools. Try to talk after that. So we have 12,690 students in our school district. So if you think about that, times their parents, so over 25,000 parents, some may have more, a lot of students that we're responsible for. So many things going on in this world today that are coming against our children and our families. We have almost 2,000 employees, about 900 teachers who are working to do a phenomenal job every day and address so many needs that our children and families have before they can even think about learning every day.
Good evening, I'm Dr. Scott Miles. I live right here in Northampton, just around the block. Married for 44 years, 4 children, 5 grandchildren. We're blessed at this point that it has not touched us close and personal, but it has touched us in so many ways. My background is I did OBGYN practice for 28 years before leaving that and starting into addiction medicine in 2013. I became board certified in 2015. Currently, Coastal Community Behavioral Health has 2 clinics, one in St. Mary's and one in Brunswick. We treat primarily opioid use disorder, but we also treat across the spectrum, alcohol use disorder, meth use disorder, cocaine use disorder, but none greater right now than the opioid use disorder.
My name is John Hooper. I'm the Nassau County Undersheriff. I've had that position for almost 2 years. Prior to that, I spent about 15 years working undercover narcotics with the Nassau County Sheriff's Office. My family's lived here for the last 25 years, raising 3 children, 1 grandchild. So this really means a lot to me to make sure that this doesn't happen to my family or anybody near me.
My name's Greg Rowland. I've been fortunate enough to be a native of Fernandina Beach in Nassau County for the past 66 years, I think. I've had a fire department career of plus 42 years. Most of you know that most firemen have a part-time job. I can't hammer a nail straight, so I became a nurse for my off days. That's where a lot of my experience came in with the treatment of drug overdoses, along with my street experience for 40 plus years. So I've seen what it can do from the front end side of emergency services to the emergency department. We're pretty fortunate we have these caregivers in Nassau County to provide this help for us. Nassau County Fire Rescue is on the front end of the service along with my law enforcement partners. We're doing everything we can to make a dent in it. So we're glad to be able to participate in this forum.
Thank you all. We're going to give the first question to you, Dr. Miles. Can you please briefly provide an overview of the overdose crisis, including the different waves of the epidemic, how it got started, and what the crisis looks like now?
Yeah, so most of you probably know that the opioid epidemic started back in the 90s. Purdue Pharma was the leading culprit there. Joint Commission joined in and decided that pain was the fifth vital sign. And us as physicians began to get pressure from the hospitals. Those of us that did surgery, they would go and talk to the patients and use, you've seen the smiley face, frowny face called Wong-Baker scale. And if the patient told the hospital that they weren't adequately treated with their pain, then they began to bring sanctions on us doctors. So there were two issues there. Of course, we believed early on what Purdue Pharma was selling, that it was not addictive, which was a lie, as you have seen in the news, I'm sure, plenty. And we also realized that our livelihoods were threatened, so most of us began to prescribe, and some overprescribe opioids, which drove the first wave back in the 90s. Things kind of calmed down. The DEA jumped on top of it and went around, and they came counter against us, and they started sanctioning the docs for overprescribing. And so they began to clean up the pill mills, many of which were in South Florida. People were traveling thousands of miles a week to get illicit prescriptions to take it back to their home state. That's where it all started. They shut those down, and it drove people back to the street, and all of a sudden heroin was on the resurgence. And when heroin went on the resurgence, it wasn't the same heroin that was on the street in the 70s. It was much more potent. So overdoses began to climb. It didn't really reach kind of national prominence until the 2000s when the politicians got involved. And again, they tried to put Band-Aids on this and not very successful. And as you saw what happened on the statistics from 2020, 21, 22, and now 23, it's, climbing. The overdose crisis is climbing again, and people are dying by the thousands, record numbers. And that was driven largely by the isolation created by the pandemic. Folks just, they were isolated. We saw a skyrocket not only in that, but alcohol overuse and just polydrug abuse. So it was really the pandemic that has now fueled this up. And unfortunately, Colombia cleaned up their cartels. They all moved to Mexico, which is right across the street from us. And they figured out that it was cheaper for them to make the synthetic fentanyl in their lab. It was much more potent and much more lucrative. So you're going to hear more about the fentanyl here as we go, but that's, there's almost no heroin on the street any longer. Patients come in and tell us, I'm shooting heroin, I'm snorting heroin. When we test them, there's no heroin in their system. When we test for fentanyl, it's almost 100% fentanyl. So this is really unfortunate. We're going to talk more about fentanyl here in a little bit.
Yes, sir. As he mentioned, fentanyl's driving the overdose crisis. What we're seeing is fake pills disguised as prescription meds. Our friends at the DEA confiscated over 50 million pills last year, and out of those 50 million, 6 out of 10 contained a lethal dose of fentanyl. So the message that you should take away, if you don't take away anything else, here tonight is do not experiment with drugs. Do not take anything that has not been given to you by a doctor like Dr. Miles or a legitimate pharmacy. There is no more experimenting with drugs. It will kill you. I want to give the next question to Assistant Chief Rowland. What does the overdose crisis currently look like here in Nassau County?
Well, just want to remind you, our numbers are just the people that we go to, so it doesn't encompass the folks that go to the hospital themselves or what law enforcement sees. Over the last 3 years, we've had a 35% increase in narcotic overdoses that we go to. Now, mind you, we're just a small portion of people that service the county. We have Fernandina Beach Police Department, Nassau County Sheriff's, Fernandina Beach Fire. So we're just a portion of what goes on out there. If there is a bright light in any of this, year to date, we've seen an 8% decrease in our numbers. So I'm not sure what's causing that. We hope it's a trend for the better. We'll see. Cautiously optimistic on those particular numbers. But for us, for Nassau County Fire Rescue, it's predominantly 20 to 50-year-olds, white males. Again, this can happen to anybody, but just our profile that we go to is mainly predominantly male, age 20 to 50. Again, that's just a small portion of what we go to. So it happens to everybody. We have them from the age of in the 80s to as young as teens, 11, 12 years old. So we have those issues out there in Nassau County. But fortunately, we've seen a slight decrease. We hope that continues.
So glad to hear that. And I think part of that could probably be described, in part to the tremendous efforts that are taking place with many of the treatment providers and resource providers in the audience that have those tables set up out there, distributing Narcan and getting education and awareness into the community. But we greatly appreciate your efforts with the fire department. I want to ask Under Sheriff Hooper, what are some of the challenges the Nassau County Sheriff's Office is facing in relation to the overdose crisis?
So when I first got into law enforcement, everybody kind of realizes when you get up in the morning, you put a gun on and you go to work, there's some dangers associated with doing that job. One of the biggest challenges we face today is that fentanyl in somebody's house, in somebody's car, in their pocket, if you don't see it, it can get airborne and it can absorb into your skin immediately. And I don't know if you've watched YouTube any at all in the last 6-8 months, you can see numerous videos of police officers on traffic stops or in houses that they're fine 1 second, fall out, and have to be, Narcan has to be administered to them to bring them back, and it has to be several doses of it to get them back. There's this particular one in, I believe it's in Deltona, where a female officer literally falls out in the middle of the street immediately after coming in contact with fentanyl. So that's a huge challenge for us as administrators now to try to train new officers that you just can't do things the way you did it before. You can't just touch everything that comes out. Even these proactive officers that did the traffic stops, these drug officers that's what their job is. They have to change the way they do their job completely to keep from getting exposed to this fentanyl. So that's a huge problem. The other, more of kind of the business of law enforcement side, these overdoses, when law enforcement arrives, traditionally we would just go and if somebody's sick, if it's not CPR we're doing, then we're just going to call rescue and have them show up. Stand by and wait for fire rescue to get there to save us. Today, we can't do that any longer. We have to train these officers now how to use Narcan, what to look for, what the signs and symptoms of this overdose are. And then if they do pass away from the overdose, we have to bring in investigators now to investigate the death. Early on, we used to treat it like a suicide, like an overdose, a suicide overdose. Today and over the last couple of years, we've realized now we can actually charge people with, if we can figure out who sold this heroin or fentanyl, whatever it is, to them, we can charge them. The business side of it means that becomes very labor intensive. It takes a lot of people to get involved to prosecute these people.
Oh, thank you, Undersheriff. Superintendent Burns, how do you see this issue affecting students in the school system?
Well, for the last few years, 2 to 3 years, maybe 4, vape has been our number one concern, that students had vapes in school. And then, of course, there's some marijuana, but just as recent as this year, we're now seeing the impact of this drug in our schools. We have officers in all of our middle and high schools, and we had an incident at a school where a student had some items on him. He was questioned about them, and no, there was nothing there. There was nothing there. The officer came in, he tested what the student did have in a bag in his backpack, and it tested positive for fentanyl, as was described by one of these gentlemen, by Undersheriff Hooper. You know, so the administrators on site who were dealing with this issue, they touched it. You know, they were testing it on site. So it not was that student only in danger, but so was everyone else around them. It could have been deadly for any of those folks. So we are seeing it trickle in now into our school district.
Scary situation. Dr. Miles, based on several credible sources, we know illicit fentanyl is now driving the overdose crisis. Can you please explain what fentanyl is and why it can be so dangerous?
Well, you've heard terms opiate and opioid. Opiate is the naturally occurring products that come from the opium plant, which are morphine, heroin, and all their derivatives. Opioids are anything now that are synthetics. Fentanyl has been used in the operating room by anesthesia for years as an adjunct to anesthesia. Fentanyl is a very potent, full agonist, fully enjoins what we call the mu receptor, which creates the euphoria, the respiratory depression, etc. Just to give you kind of a real life look at fentanyl, morphine used to be considered the strongest out there. Fentanyl, and it comes in milligrams, morphine does. Fentanyl comes in micrograms, which means it is 1,000 times more potent than morphine. They also use something in the operating room called sufentanil. That is 10,000 times more potent than morphine. And being manufactured on the street is something called carfentanil. Carfentanil was originally developed as a tranquilizer for elephants and is 100,000 times more potent than morphine. So what the Mexican cookers, we call them, have devised is they make these analogs of fentanyl that are on the order of thousands of times more potent than even fentanyl, the original fentanyl itself. And this is why, as Undersheriff described, you know, it doesn't take a lot to become aerosolized into their bodies, and all of a sudden they have no receptor sensitivity to it, and they're down on the ground fast. And like you said, they have to use multiple doses of Narcan, where it used to be with just the regular heroin on the street. A single dose would bring somebody back around, kind of bring them back up swinging. So fentanyl and its analogs are driving the crisis, and they're extremely potent.
And we cannot emphasize enough how dangerous it is and how you never know what's going to be in the drug you're taking if you get it off the streets. So thank you so much. Undersheriff, can you discuss the types of drugs you're seeing and your officers are seeing on the streets?
So we're still seeing the traditional drugs, marijuana, cocaine, crack cocaine, but they're not near the level that we see methamphetamine and fentanyl and heroin these days, and probably more fentanyl than heroin, but when it's mixed, we don't have a way to tell the difference. Largely, our narcotics unit now is pretty much devoted to methamphetamine, heroin, and fentanyl reduction.
Thank you. I think it's important for people to know what's on the streets here in this community. Assistant Chief Rowland, who is at risk? And this is pretty straightforward, simple question, but I think it bears explanation. Who is at risk for addiction to opioids and a fentanyl overdose, and why?
From our experience in the fire rescue business, it's like I mentioned earlier, the white male, age 20 to 50, that has a tendency to have either an injury or other substance abuse issues, whether it's alcohol, methamphetamines, or any of those particular items. Since Dr. Miles pointed out, the DEA has cut down or cracked down on this prescription aspect of it, but the providers of the illicit drug trade have figured out a way to make it to the streets here. And there's no doubt we're seeing stronger fentanyl, stronger opioids. For us to use 1 or 2 doses of Narcan, and 2 or 3 years ago, now we're having 3 or 4. So I think those particular segment of the population, age 20 to 50, for us, the white male demographic is more prone to this particular issue than the other segments. Not to minimize anybody else that has an issue with it, but typically from our perspective, it's been the person that's had a pain medication and it was withdrawn or not prescribed by the physician anymore, and they look to other sources to provide for their pain level. And again, that led into other substance abuse issues. Alcoholism is probably one of our leading indicators of the people that we go to that has a tendency to substance abuse on a broader scale. Not everyone, but has a tendency to show that in all areas. So we do have a combination of alcohol and opioid abuse that we see a lot in our business.
I think those numbers bear true in all the counties we're working in. So we work in 8 additional counties besides Nassau. And what you're describing is what we're seeing. But an interesting statistic that we're also seeing is because fentanyl is being laced in everybody's drug of choice, all demographics are being impacted by this. And overdose deaths have skyrocketed for every race, ethnicity, gender, age group. Again, can't emphasize enough that this does not discriminate. And in particular, we see the highest percentage of increase, not overall numbers, but percentage of increase taking place in the Native American community, the Black community, and the Hispanic community. So overall, it's still impacting white males from a numbers perspective, but all of the other races are being impacted as well as far as the percentage of increase is concerned. So thank you so much for that information. I would want to ask Dr. Burns this next question. How are you bringing awareness to students about the overdose crisis and educating them on the dangers of fentanyl and illicit drugs?
So I would say we're not specifically talking about fentanyl, but we have had for years the DARE program in our elementary schools for our 5th graders, drug abuse resistance education. But just yesterday, we had a program at Yulee Middle School called The Facts, Your Future. And I participated. We had a session for our seniors and for our juniors. Over 600 students participated. And we had people speaking who had experience in their families with incidents that had occurred. And I would just say, at 9 o'clock in the morning at a high school, I did not expect 300 seniors to be quiet. But probably the time change had a little to do with that. But you could have heard a pin drop in the room. And what I realized is people were speaking from their experiences and that these students were listening. It was impactful to them. So have we done enough? No. Do we need to do more? Absolutely. Because this is touching the lives of our children, of our children's parents, and actually everyone. It was asked in the beginning if you asked to raise your hand, everyone has been touched by this. And, you know, we all have addictions to food and other things that we love, but this is a serious issue. But I would say that we're starting to have more conversations, and we know we have to do more. A lot of things are added onto the plate for our educators in our school district, but this is absolutely a crisis that we have to address.
Thank you. Under Sheriff Hooper, how are drug distributors and drug dealers using fentanyl to alter other drugs? And why do dealers utilize a drug as dangerous as fentanyl? I think that's a question I get often is, why would drug dealers put fentanyl in their drugs if they know it has the potential to kill their customer?
So the first part of the question, how are they using fentanyl and other drugs? Basically, they're just lacing with every other drug that they use with it. Methamphetamine, heroin, they mix the fentanyl into it and it creates a different type of high for the user. When I was working narcotics, I had a drug user that I was interviewing, and I asked him, because I've never used drugs in my life, so I asked him, what is it about heroin that keeps you coming back? And he used this analogy. He said, if cocaine's like flying an airplane, heroin's like flying the space shuttle. And I interviewed him a little while later on, a few years later again, and he said that heroin with fentanyl in it would be like landing on Mars. So I can only take that to mean that this is such a better, more euphoric high than anybody could ever imagine with these two drugs mixed together. So that's the only reason I can figure they would use that dangerous of a drug and continue to do so, knowing that any time could be their last.
And I would add to that drug dealers don't care if you die. There's somebody else waiting to buy their drugs. And because fentanyl, it takes such a small amount to create what Undersheriff is describing as that euphoric high, it's profitable for them. And so it's easier to smuggle as well. That's another reason why they utilize this. But basically, it's an economic thing for drug dealers. And then for the people that are taking it, exactly what he described, it's something they've never experienced before, so it keeps them coming back. Assistant Chief Rowland, this is a two-part question for you, and they go hand in hand. So what are some signs that a person has overdosed? And I think we have a slide to put up on the screen as well, kind of illustrate that.
Some of the basic signs are fairly simple. All of us should be able to recognize them. They have a tendency to act like they're falling asleep. You can't wake them up. Their respiratory rate slows down, way too slow. It's like they're on a downward spiral of their body functions. Their consciousness goes from being awake, alert, to almost nothing. You can't wake them up, no shake and shout. And if you're lucky enough to be able to examine their pupils, they get to be constricted, pinpoint size. And a late sign, of course, is the bluish lips, nose. And by that time, they need emergent help. And unfortunately, if you don't have Narcan around, time is of the essence. So that's why a 911 phone call is the right choice in this particular case. So if you recognize those signs and symptoms, call right away and let us know what's happening.
Second part to the question is, what is naloxone and how does it work to alter the effects of an overdose?
You're going to get a good education in just a little bit from Amy Pipkin about Narcan and Datera. Fortunately for us, Narcan is an opioid antagonist. It just simply means it takes the place of the opioid or the opiate. It kicks it out of the way and counteracts the effect of what the narcotic is trying to do. So basically, the Narcan, as long as you have enough of it, will replace whatever narcotic opioid and bring them back to consciousness or life possibly. So it's important that we all listen when Amy gives us her little discussion. So what I'd like to say to everybody out here is equate the Narcan or Datera with hands-on CPR or AED that are life-saving measures for everyday use for us. Narcan can be that helpful community like CPR and AED has become. It's just going to have to become a way of life. It's one of those things, if you use it, you'll see immediate results. And then our job, we can take over from there.
It's an excellent point. I'm glad you emphasized that. Dr. Burns, what resources does the school system employ to help students who are dealing with challenges related to drugs and or mental health? I know you mentioned the program you just recently did. What else do you have? Because we know this is a co-occurring situation, mental health and opioid use disorder or substance use disorder.
Yes, and we've seen a tremendous increase in mental health needs as well in our school district. So we have in our school district what we call a system of care. And through that system of care, we're able to provide support for our students and families, as well as refer them to the services and the helps that they need to get the help that they need. We have partnerships with many agencies and organizations in our county and around the county. A starting point is one. And they have a mobile response team that works closely with our school district to address as needed, the needs of our students in our school district. But through that system of care, and the support is tiered in that system of care to provide the services that are needed for our students and their families.
We're so grateful for that. Dr. Miles, why is it difficult for someone to overcome drug addiction, particularly when it involves opioid use disorder?
There we go. I think we saw in the video the family talking about rewiring the brain. So let's talk a little bit about the brain for a second. Every substance of abuse works through the euphoric effect of spiking one neurotransmitter called dopamine. The faster and the harder that dopamine is spiked, the more addictive the drug. So we know now through science that there's also genetic predisposition. As the family said very well, nobody wakes up one morning and says, hey, I think I want to be a drug addict. I think I want to be a heroin addict. But once they try it, if they have the genetic predisposition, it rewires the primitive reward center of the brain, which is very powerful. Part of treatment of these folks is cognitive behavioral therapy, trying to get their executive portion of their brain to take charge of that primitive portion that's been rewired. Opioids are no different. I will tell you this, one of our biggest challenges right now is that methamphetamine spikes the dopamine so hard and so fast that it's almost impossible to get somebody off of methamphetamine, even more than opioids. It's just incredible. It depends on the route. So things like smoking and nasal inhalation actually cross the blood-brain barrier more quickly and spike the dopamine faster, even faster than IV, which was an incredible finding for me as I began down this road in 2013. I always thought IV has got to be the worst. It's going to be the most addictive, and it's not true. So many of our patients are not using IV fentanyl. They're snorting and they're smoking, and it takes a lot of medication to try to get them, into recovery and get them moving.
We're going to stay with you on this next question, Dr. Miles, and it kind of is a second part to what you just answered. Some people would say that addiction is a moral failure and people just need to quit using drugs. Can you please speak to why this misconception is inaccurate and the dangers associated with this type of stigma?
Absolutely. We face this problem every day in our clinic. Families putting pressure on our patients who are getting medication-assisted treatment, telling them they're trading one drug for another. You just need to stop. It's a moral failure. It's a character flaw. Absolutely, they have not looked at the science. The science will not bear that out in any way, shape, or form. It is a chronic, relapsing disease and should be viewed just like hypertension, just like diabetes. Some of the patients will be successful and be treated and slowly weaned off of medication. Others will require it the rest of their life, depending on how deep the rewiring of the brain goes. It's just unbelievable. I can share one story of this very thing. We had a young man who was shooting IV heroin. He worked at the local hospital. He was an x-ray tech. He came in to our clinic. He was doing very well. His wife was a nurse, a medical professional, and just stayed on him night and day that you've traded one drug for another. So eventually he dropped out of treatment, and he's no longer with us. We've seen this over and over and over, and it's a very sad situation. But as you all know, the stigma and the opinions are out there that people hold. They have not looked at the science. They've made up their mind that this is a problem with the person and not a problem with the chronic brain disease.
Thank you. We appreciate that perspective, and I think sometimes before I started doing this work, I used to think, why don't people just stop? You're ruining your life, you're ruining your family's lives, but now we know that the science bears out that this is a disease. So thank you for speaking to that. Under Sheriff, what role does social media play in the selling and distribution of illegal drugs?
So I'm going to give up my age a little bit here and go back to when I was working narcotics. As narcotics detectives, we used to have to drive around and we'd get complaints on areas. So we'd go to that area and we'd watch, and you'd see cars come in, people exchange money for drugs, and then we'd stop them and arrest them. Today, you can use Cash App or WhatsApp or Snapchat or Facebook or any of the social media websites to purchase, deliver any narcotic you'd like. It happens every day. It's actually incredible to me how easy it is for people to get illegal narcotics delivered to their house with just a click of a button on their phone. It's as bad as DoorDash. So please monitor what your children are doing on social media, because it is so easy for everybody to access. Anybody in this room could access anything they wanted with a touch of a button if you just know where to go. And all of these social media sites are, they're inundated with these drug dealers and human traffickers, and all of these different illegal operations are funneled straight through the social media websites.
Because of what you described, and I think that's a shock to some of the people in the audience. I just heard some people say, wow. And if you've got kids, they're on social media, and I want to reemphasize what Undersheriff said. If you're paying for that phone, you can take it and look at it. Don't be afraid of your kids. It could save their lives. And for the very reason that he described, we got together with LSF Health Systems, our friends at North Florida HIDA, and Community Coalition Alliance, and we came up with a social media campaign that is educating the Gen Z population on the dangers of fentanyl. And we have a slide to throw up on the screen. Love for you to take your phone out right now. This is why I asked you to download or to get on the Wi-Fi network. Take a picture of that QR code, and it'll take you straight to the website. There are resources on the website that you can share, that you can use, that will help educate you. A lot of the things that are being mentioned here from these experts, these subject matter experts, are detailed in the website. There's social media graphics that you can utilize to help spread awareness. So we would love for you to engage with that, and want to say thanks to all of our partners that helped us make that possible. Dr. Burns, what do you see as the greatest challenge the school district faces when it comes to the overdose crisis?
I think one of our greatest challenges will be there's so much already for our teachers and our learning communities to do, but adding this and being able to provide adequate education and information and do things that are impactful, to share the word example like we did yesterday, the message of the mother and those daughters and that family. I think everyone has a story, and those are impactful stories. And I think we need to figure out how to put that together and reach our children and our families.
Absolutely. Thank you for your focus on that. I want to ask Assistant Chief Rowland, what is Nassau County Fire Rescue doing in the community to address the overdose crisis, maybe from a proactive perspective?
Well, let me say, my personal opinion, it wouldn't hurt my feelings if we didn't go to any calls associated with narcotic overdose. Prevention is the key, and that's where law enforcement and Dr. Miles and the school board are the biggest key or the biggest driver in this effort. For Nassau County Fire Rescue, for pre-hospital emergency care, what we're doing is we have a very aggressive medical director. He's challenging us to bring our skills up to a higher level of care, our airway control skills to a higher level of care, because as we face more and more of these dangerous narcotics out there, those skills are going to be needed. Whether we want to use them or not, we need to be ready for the very worst possible case. So that's what we're doing internally to get ready for a case if we need to. Again, we're always willing to cooperate with our partners here, where it's the Sheriff's Office, police, school board, and participating in any kind of forums that we can. Again, the big drivers are prevention, the school and the home and the skills that Dr. Miles' crew brings to this table. We're kind of like after the fact kind of care. We're not the ones that need to start the ball rolling. So again, I hope you don't call us. That'd be my druthers.
Absolutely, and I think you talking about prevention is a great segue into just reemphasizing the importance of organizations like Community Coalition Alliance and what Danielle and Libby are doing. By the way, the bags that you were given when you came in were provided to us by Community Coalition Alliance that include the Narcan and the Tetera that you're going to get trained on here in a minute. So prevention is so important when it comes to fighting this epidemic. For the final question of the evening, I'm going to ask you, Dr. Miles, and you touched on this a little bit, but I think it bears repeating as we kind of wrap up the panel portion of what we're doing here this evening. Can you talk about the phrase relapse as part of recovery, why that is, and maybe the need for more compassion? I know the Bales family mentioned compassion and grace being shown to people who struggle. Can you just kind of touch on that as we wrap up the panel?
Absolutely. Relapse is a part of recovery just because of what we said about the primitive portion of the brain, the reward center. It's extremely powerful. And, there's if you remember the story of a famous actor named Philip Seymour Hoffman. He had been clean off of heroin for 20-some years. And he was found dead in a hotel room with a needle sticking in his arm. That's how long this disease lasts. It's once the brain is rewired, it's lifelong. I tell patients very clearly, as long as you keep ing on the end of the word recover, meaning an ongoing process, you'll move in the right direction. The second you put an ed on the end of that word, you're getting ready to fall off the cliff because you've never recovered. And that includes all substances. Every single substance, including alcohol, meth, cocaine, they all affect the same primitive portion of the brain. People with gambling addiction, sex addiction, food addiction, it's the same primitive portion of the brain that's affected. And it's dopamine is the driver. It's in the driver's seat. So yes, unfortunately, relapse, we never punish a patient in our treatment for relapse. We know that it can happen. There are certain things we won't tolerate. You can't sell drugs in my parking lot. You can't bring a gun into my facility. You can't threaten my staff. Those are automatic withdrawal. You're discharged administratively, but never for just relapse. Because that's part of this disease.
Thank you. And thank you to the panelists for taking the time to share their expertise with us this evening. Can we please give them a round of applause for everything they're doing to help confront the overdose crisis in this community? We really appreciate y'all. And as they exit the stage, we're going to have a transition here over the next couple of minutes. They're going to exit on that side, and I'm going to invite up Amy Pipkin with Starting Point. She's going to come to the stage for her presentation. We're extremely thankful for the work Starting Point is doing in Nassau County and beyond to provide treatment and resources to address substance use disorder and mental health issues. What you're about to hear from Amy is some ways that you can make an immediate impact on this issue, and so we're grateful for your willingness to train us this evening, so the mic is yours.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. We've taken in a lot. And you often, when you hear stories that are impactful, hear the answers is, well, what can I do? Well, there is something you can do, something every community member in Nassau County can do, and that is carry Narcan, also known as naloxone. So it's in your red bags. If you'll look in your red bag and pull that box out, just want to give you some reference. Thank you. That is how naloxone comes. There are 2 small nasal cannulas in there that contain Narcan. What we'll talk about first, although they already did talk about it, is how I get to the next slide. You got it? Oh, okay, there we go. So what are the signs and symptoms of an overdose? And it is important to know. We may think couple years ago, we might have thought, well, I'm not going to see anyone who overdoses unless I come across a random, person. I think these last few years have really shown us that we are all affected by it, and the ability to educate ourselves to save a life is so worth it. So you have, if you get in a pinch, you think punch. How to spot an overdose. It's pinpoint pupils, unresponsiveness, nails and lips are blue, clammy skin, and the heartbeat is slow or gone. What a scary moment that's going to be for you if it ever happens to you. However, with education about what naloxone can do, at least you know you can do something about it. So in those boxes that you have, there's steps that you can take. If you come across, or a family member, someone you know is suspected of having an overdose, you have Narcan in your first aid kit. That is our whole idea for outreach, is we want Narcan in everybody's first aid kit. So if you do come across someone with those symptoms that we just had up, the first thing you do is, hopefully you might be with somebody else, you have someone call 911 and you get your Narcan. You lay the person down at first, you'll open your Narcan, and there's 2 doses in each box. And as you open it, you will find it looks like almost like an Afrin or a nose spray that you would use. You unpeel it, you peel the package back, you have the person right now. And basically, after you go through all of the, are you okay, and none of that happens, it's time to use a Narcan. You simply bring it out of the package, put it up the nostril gently, and push. And that releases the Narcan into someone's body. So, again, it is as complicated and as simple as that. The biggest thing is you have to have the Narcan to be able to do any of this. So after that happens, you put the person in a recovery position, and we have a picture of it here. The hand supports the head, knee prevents person from rolling over. We don't want anyone to vomit and aspirate it. So you've done that, and you wait 2 to 3 minutes. If there's still no response, then you get another Narcan. And like they were saying, maybe back in the day 1 might use, I've heard stories of 3 and 4 needing to be used to come back. So I'm just going to go over those steps one more time. The first step is to have the Narcan. Make it part of your everyday thing. It is life-saving. I think everybody in here, after we hear the stories and how impactful, we'd all be willing to save someone's life. Step 1, again, you have to have the Narcan on your person. Where do you get Narcan? Interesting question. There's a lot of folks in here that can distribute it to it, and Starting Point Behavioral Health Care also is a Narcan distributor. You can walk in and ask for 10 boxes of Narcan, and then you're going to be given 10 boxes of Narcan. If you want 1, we rarely do just 1 anymore. We give 2 boxes of Narcan to everybody. I don't need your name. I don't need your phone number. We need no data from you to get that first step of Narcan. Come in, ask for it. Go to a training if you see it advertised. ISaveFlorida.org, I think it is, .org. You can go on that and you'll find everybody in your area that distributes Narcan. So that step 1 is getting that Narcan, getting trained on how to use it, and a little bit of education. If you have it, you come across it, you can save somebody's life. I cannot emphasize that enough. A couple things I want to point out as well is Narcan, if it is not an actual overdose situation and you've sprayed Narcan up someone's nose, guess what's going to happen? Nothing. It is not used for anything but opioid reversal. It cannot harm the person. It is perfectly safe. The only thing it does is can save someone's life who's in an overdose situation, without a doubt. So our idea also, I want to emphasize, is you have to call 911. If you are going to give someone Narcan, please call 911, because that gives a couple opportunities. There may be some other things wrong. You may be able to, that person comes back and they might have other medical issues, and you want someone to take them to a facility where there actually might be a person there who can come talk to them immediately. It might be the time they decide to go towards recovery. Many people say, well, they've had Narcan, that person 4 times. Yep, I will do CPR on someone who has a heart attack 4 times. It's worth doing. It might be the time they decide to get in recovery, without a doubt. So, calling EMS. Third thing, how many of you heard of the Good Samaritan law? Anybody? So sometimes we might be a little anxious getting involved in one of these situations, worry we might do something wrong, although you really can't do anything wrong. You might get a little anxious. However, if you are in the process of trying to save someone's life, you're not held liable for anything. If you are also using and you're scared that the police are going to get you, you are covered by that Good Samaritan law as well. So please take those steps. Get some Narcan, carry it with you. You may end up being someone's lifesaver one day, and we won't have to hear these tragic stories. We're going to continue. I agree, prevention is the key. So that is your way of what can you do when you leave here? What can I do to help my community? Carry Narcan. There are numerous other agencies here who distribute Narcan. We don't worry about who you get it from. Just get it. Next slide, please. The other preventive measure is called Deterra. Deterra looks like a little black Ziploc bag. And what it can be used for is you can use it to dispense of your medications that are no longer being used. It can be used for all medications, but with opioids, it undoes the effect. You basically open the pouch, pour the pills, patches in there, fill it halfway with warm water, give it a little shake, let it breathe a little, then seal it, shake again, and then you can dispose of it in your garbage can safely. Deterra is also available for free at Starting Point, and I know our partners with CCA also have it. So if you're interested in that, you want to know more, please, please, please reach out. I just want to say thank you for allowing me to talk about this, but I would be remiss if I didn't also thank the people that are in your audience right now that have been working at this night and day to make a dent. We appreciate you all too, and thank you for coming out. TJ?
Thank you so much, Amy. I'm going to ask Michelle Holbrook to come to the stage at this time. How many of you know Michelle? Raise your hand if you know her. Yeah, it's half of Nassau County. In fact, you're probably here because of Michelle. Every time that I asked her for a connection when we were planning this, which side would you like? Here, take this side. She said, oh, I know that person. I can connect you to that person. So she's been an amazing partner. If you know her story. We're going to talk about that for a little bit right now as we start to wrap up this event. Sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
Thank you for being willing to share Chandler's story. How long ago did he pass away, and how old was he?
April 21st will be 3 years. He was 28 years old at the time. He would have turned 29 June the 8th of that year. He was an amazing young man.
And for those who didn't know him, how would you describe him?
Chandler had an addiction. He had a substance use disorder. He had a disease that unfortunately took his life. He Chandler was absolutely hysterical. He could have been a comedian. I mean, there were many times where I was just so mad at him that I wanted to just strangle him. And he would come up with a good joke and always make me laugh. And then, of course, you know, I'd have to turn around and face the other way before I could get mad at him again. Chandler was full of compassion, and I think you, as the family that spoke earlier, I think anyone will tell you, Chandler had such compassion for other people. He would give his last dollar to anyone, but he also had a disease and a burden. I really think he dealt with depression. I know. So that burden was so hard for him to carry more than most people.
And what was the substance, the specific substance that caused his death?
He died of cocaine, heroin, and fentanyl. And he had been clean for a year. He was arrested by Nassau County, was placed in the Nassau County Jail. We made the decision to place him in Gateway because I didn't want him just getting out of jail and not having the resources available. So we were able, the public defender was able to speak with the judge, and the judge said, yes, you are going to rehab. So we placed him in Gateway. He was clean for a year. And it goes to show you, you know, you can, it changes. And listening to all of you and to the story of the young girl that lost her life, every single thing you say is everything that I wanted to say here. You know, drugs are a disease. Have compassion on these people. You have to hear them out. You don't necessarily agree with them, but it has rechanged their wiring in their brain that they feel that what they are saying is true. You know, but they're lacing marijuana with fentanyl, and just a tiny bit will kill you. And the thing about it is just like you said, when the drug dealers lace it with fentanyl, you think that, people have asked me before, what is it, why is it that drug dealers are lacing it when they're losing their clients? Because it gives you such a bigger high. How many people in here have children, smaller children? Talk to your kids. I am telling you, it's an epidemic. Talk to your children.
Absolutely. I think you emphasizing the fentanyl is so important, and you know that's what we're seeing that is causing the majority of overdoses. Every drug has fentanyl laced in it, and so it's important for us to make sure that people are aware that you cannot experiment with drugs.
You can. We have a mutual friend who is a reporter, and the DEA took her down to Miami. And the amount of fentanyl that was confiscated by the DEA, I think just last year, was horrendous.
Over 50 million pills.
Yes.
Yep.
And the pictures that she showed me, I cried. It was awful. And I love what Chief Rowland said is, we are here to raise awareness. I don't want them to have to go to another 911 call. I don't want to have to meet a parent who has lost another child to an overdose. It's heart-wrenching. So that's why we are here. That's the reason why I share my story, is because I never want another parent or other parents that I know that are in this room that have gone through the same thing that I have gone through.
Very well said. So as we wrap up this event, what do you want to emphasize to the audience? If you had to give them one thing to take away, and I know that's going to be hard for you because you've got many great points that you always share, but what is one thing that you would want them to know as they leave this evening?
You know, I think the undersheriff said this. They live in your home, your children especially. Get in their phone. Look at what they're looking at. That is one thing that I wish I would have done as a mother, is gotten in his phone. He was older. He had a shoulder injury, and they prescribed him opioids. And so then he couldn't get him. He went to the pill mill in Miami. He couldn't get him, and then he ended up shooting heroin and eventually died of a fentanyl overdose. But get in your children's phones, get in their face, know who their friends are, be proactive in their life, sit down and talk to them about drugs. And it doesn't need to start at a middle school level. I hate to say this, but it needs to start at an elementary school level, because we're losing the war right now. And I don't want to see that happen. I see a lot of young kids. I see a young man here, and I don't want to see that happen. I see a lot of younger generation here. And
Yeah.
so be involved in their lives. If you see a loved one or you have a family member who has a drug issue, get the resources available. I read an amazing book that I will share with you, and I also brought some. You're free to take them. This young man sent them to me. He had a heroin, he has substance use disorder, and it's called Unhooked by Jason Coombs. And what I read in that book after Chandler passed away, I wish I would have had that book while he was still living.
Yeah. It's important for people to know. We've seen young people as young as 11 years of age overdosing on fentanyl. So it's in there. It's in the schools. It's out in the community. And we're not here trying to scare you. We're just here trying to educate and bring awareness, as Michelle said, so that you know what's out there and you can help steer the people that you love and care about away from those dangers. So thank you so much for your willingness to share your story and the impact you've made in this community, and that your willingness to leverage your loss to really make a difference. We greatly appreciate you.
You know, Chandler's he's not sitting, he's dancing at the feet of Jesus, and I know that. Just because he had an addiction as a substance use disorder does not make him a bad person.
That's exactly
He was
right.
baptized at the Journey Church a few years before he passed away. So I know without a doubt where he is, and that gives me hope and a peace.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
Appreciate you. At this time, I'm going to ask a pastor from Journey Church to come up. He's going to close us in prayer. And I want to remind you that there are resource partners in the lobby that would love for you to stop by their table so they can share with you the amazing things that they're doing in the community to help address this issue. I want to say one more time, thank you to all of the partners that helped with this event, and especially Journey Church for hosting it and doing such an amazing job of working with us to put this on for you this evening. So thank you, Pastor.
I want to say again on behalf of our pastors, Daryl and Cara Ballard, that we're so appreciative of everybody who's been a part of this and helping us to raise awareness on something that's so very important. Would you join me in prayer? Father, in the name of Jesus, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the opportunity to be educated, to have our awareness raised into something that's just so critically important, in which we're all stakeholders. We pray now for our community that you would help us. We pray for every stakeholder. We pray for our superintendent, our law enforcement, those who work in first responding, and our doctors. And we pray comfort even for those families, all who have been touched and affected by this. And we believe in your divine power to help us. In the strong name of Jesus, we pray. Amen.